The week before my wedding, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table. It was early morning. The stove was still warm from breakfast. My sisters had been sent outside. The house was quiet in a way it almost never was, and I remember thinking, this is it. This is the moment. She's going to tell me everything I need to know. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at me. And then she said, "A wife submits to her husband. That is what God asks of you. That is all you need to know." Then she stood up, smoothed her apron, and went back to the dishes. That was it. That was the conversation. 7 words of instruction before the most confusing, disorienting night of my life. I was 19 years old. If you're new here, my name is Hannah, and this is Hannah the Amish girl. I grew up Old Order Amish in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. I left a few years ago, and this channel is where I finally say the things my community never allowed me to say out loud. The stories we carried in silence. The truths buried underneath the obedience. If you want to hear more of what life was really like behind the prayer cap, please subscribe to this channel, click the like button, and make sure you turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. It means more to me than you know. And drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. Now, I want to be clear about something before I go further. What I am about to share is not a story about one woman's experience. It is not a rare case. It is not an exception. What I am about to tell you is what virtually every Amish girl I grew up with received as preparation before her wedding night. Some received slightly more. Most received less. And the effects of that silence rippled forward into years of marriage, into bedrooms and kitchens and quiet morning moments of confusion that none of us had words for, sitting across from husbands we had promised our lives to, and feeling, underneath the routine, a loneliness we couldn't name. This is that story. In the Old Order Amish world, a girl's education about men happens in 3 parts. I have thought about this many times since leaving. I have sat with therapists and turned it over and over in the way you turn over a stone that's been sitting in the same place for years, wondering what's underneath. And what I keep arriving at is this. There were 3 things we were taught. 3 things that were considered sufficient. And not one of them was actually true in the way we needed it to be. The first thing we were taught was this: men have needs, and a wife's duty is to meet them. This was not stated plainly. Nothing in Amish life is stated plainly when it comes to the body. But it was woven into everything. Into the sermons about submission. Into the way older women spoke about their husbands, with a kind of patient resignation that I mistook for contentment. Into the way the bishop read from Ephesians at every wedding I ever attended: "Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord." The message was consistent. The husband leads, the wife yields. Whatever he needs, she provides. Her own needs, if she had any, and if they were even real, were not part of the conversation. I remember my aunt pulling me aside a few days before my wedding. She was a woman I adored. Warm, strong, someone I had watched run a household and raise 7 children with a kind of steady grace that made it look almost easy, even though I knew, even then, that it wasn't. I thought, if anyone is going to tell me something real, it will be her. She had lived it. She knew things. Surely she would say them. She held my hands. She looked at me very seriously, and she said, "Be patient with him. Men are not complicated. They just need to feel respected." I nodded like I understood. I didn't understand. I didn't know what respect had to do with the thing I was frightened about. I didn't have words for what I was frightened about, but I smiled and said, "Thank you." And she hugged me, and the moment passed, and that was the closest I got to real preparation from someone who loved me. Be patient. Men need respect. That was the first lesson. The second thing we were taught, and this one is harder to explain, was that intimacy in marriage was sacred precisely because it was silent. Modesty in the Old Order community is not just about how you dress. It is not just about keeping your hair covered and your hem below the knee. Modesty is a posture you carry inside your own mind. You do not dwell on your body. You do not examine your own desires. You do not speak about physical things because speaking about them makes them real in a way that is considered dangerous. I grew up believing that a good woman did not think too much about the wedding night. That thinking about it was already a kind of immodesty. That the girls who whispered about it at the Sunday singings were edging toward something shameful. So I didn't think about it. Or I tried not to. And when the thoughts came anyway, the fear, the questions, the terrible blankness where information should have been, I pushed them down and told myself that God would provide understanding when the time came. That was what we were told, in the vague and circular way these things were communicated. God will guide you. Trust your husband. The body knows. The body knows. I have thought about those words so many times since leaving. Because in one sense, yes, the body does know things. It knows hunger and cold and exhaustion. It knows touch. But a body that has never been given information, that has been taught since girlhood to distrust its own signals, that has been trained to equate physical awareness with sinfulness, that body is not a reliable guide. That body has been quietly, consistently taught to work against itself. And no one told us that. No one told us we might arrive at our wedding night frightened of our own skin. Before I keep going, if this is resonating with you, if you grew up somewhere that taught you silence instead of truth, please subscribe to this channel and like this video. Every like tells me that this story matters. Every subscriber means one more person who gets to hear what was never said out loud. I am so grateful you are here. The third thing we were taught about men was perhaps the most quietly devastating of all. We were taught that a husband's patience was a gift, and that a good wife did not test it. Let me explain what that actually meant in practice. It meant that if something felt wrong, if there was discomfort, if there was pain, if there was confusion, the correct response was silence. Endurance. A good wife did not complain. A good wife did not make her husband feel like he had done something wrong. A good wife absorbed whatever the wedding night brought, and she moved forward. My friend Rebecca married at 20. She was one of the gentlest people I have ever known. The kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday, who always knew which neighbor needed a meal brought over, who laughed easily and freely in a way that was rare in our community. She told me, years after we had both left, what her wedding night was like. She said the hardest part wasn't the pain. It wasn't the confusion. It wasn't even the loneliness of lying there in the dark, feeling like a stranger in her own body. The hardest part was that her husband, a decent man, a kind man, a man who had never intended to hurt her, fell asleep afterward. And she lay there in the silence, in the unfamiliar room, and she had no framework for what had just happened. She didn't know if it was supposed to feel like that. She didn't know if she had done something wrong. She didn't know if the strangeness she felt was grief or sin or simply what marriage was. She said she stared at the ceiling until nearly dawn, and in the morning she made breakfast and she did not say a single word. Because that was the third lesson. A good wife does not test her husband's patience. A good wife endures. A good wife's silence is her faithfulness. Rebecca endured in silence for 8 months before an older woman in her church district said something to her, not directly, never directly, but sideways, in the quiet language that Amish women use to pass forbidden knowledge to each other. A comment about olive oil, a glance that lasted a half-second too long. A door cracked open just wide enough for Rebecca to walk through. 8 months, because nobody told her there was a door. I got married on a Thursday in late October. Our wedding was held at my parents' home, nearly 300 people filling the house and the barn, the tables loaded with food we had been preparing for days. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes thick with butter, pies lined up along the counter like a small, beautiful army. The house smelled like coffee and wood smoke and something warmer underneath, and something that was just the smell of people who love each other crowded into the same space. The ceremony was long. The bishop preached about yielding, about building a household on the correct foundation, about what God asks of a husband and a wife. I sat in my plain blue dress and my white apron, and I listened. And underneath all the listening, I was running through the conversation at the kitchen table again. 7 words. A wife submits to her husband. That is all you need to know. By the time Jonas and I were finally alone that night, I had been awake for nearly 20 hours. My feet ached so deeply I could feel it in my spine. My face hurt from smiling. The bedroom was simple. A wooden bed Jonas had built himself, a quilt my grandmother had sewn in squares of blue and cream, a basin of cool water on the dresser, then a single kerosene lamp burning low on the nightstand, throwing long soft shadows up the walls. Jonas sat on the edge of the bed and loosened his collar. He looked at me, and I looked at him. And we were both, I realized in that moment, equally terrified. He had received exactly as much preparation as I had. A conversation with his father that, he told me much later, consisted of work hard, lead well, provide for your family. Nothing about the room we were now sitting in. Nothing about the girl sitting across from him who was trying very hard not to let her hands shake. We were 2 people handed a life together and sent into a room with no instructions and no map, and the quiet expectation that we would somehow find our way. What happened that night was not terrible. Jonas was careful in the way that a person is careful when they are genuinely trying not to cause harm, but have no idea what harm might look like. There was discomfort I hadn't expected. There were moments when I wanted to ask questions and couldn't find the words. There were moments when I wanted to say wait and didn't know if I was allowed to, because that was what I had been taught. A wife submits. A wife does not test patience. The body knows. My body did not know. My body was asking questions that no one had ever bothered to answer. Afterward, Jonas held me in the dark and said, "Are you all right?" And I said yes. And it was not entirely a lie. I was all right in the sense that I was still there, still breathing, still intact. But I was also all right in the way that you say you are all right when you have no vocabulary for what you actually are. When the only language you were given was silence and endurance and submission, and none of those words mean all right, but none of them mean the opposite either. We lay there, the lamp burning low, the sounds of the farm coming in through the window, horses shifting, wind in the fields, the ordinary world continuing exactly as it had before, indifferent to everything that had just changed. I didn't sleep for a long time. In the months after I left the community, after the shunning had settled into its terrible quiet, letters unanswered, phone calls that rang and rang until the silence on the other end was its own kind of answer, I found a therapist. An English woman with a small office full of plants and a patience that didn't seem to have edges. In one of our early sessions, I described my wedding night, not dramatically, just factually in the careful way you describe something you have never put into words before, testing each sentence to see if it holds the weight of what you actually mean. She listened without interrupting. She didn't flinch. She didn't look at me with the particular kind of pity that makes you feel worse than the thing you're describing. She just listened. And when I finished, she said something I have never forgotten. She said, "You weren't unprepared because no one cared about you. You were unprepared because the system needed you to be." I sat with that for a long time. I turned it over the way you turn over something heavier than it looks. Because she was right. An Amish bride who knows her own body, who has language for her own experience, who understands that her comfort matters and her pain is not a spiritual test, that woman is harder to keep silent. That woman asks questions. That woman might say, "Wait," or "I need more time," or "This doesn't feel right." And a woman who says those things is a woman the system cannot fully control. The silence wasn't modesty. The silence was architecture. It was load-bearing. It held everything else up. And it had been passed down so carefully, so consistently, across so many generations of women who taught their daughters exactly what they themselves had been taught, that no one in the chain had ever stopped to ask, Is this kind? Is this honest? Is this what love is actually supposed to look like? If you have stayed with me this long, thank you. These stories are not easy to tell. They are not easy to carry. And if you want to keep hearing them, please subscribe to this channel, like this video, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss what comes next. You being here matters to me more than I can say. I want to say one more thing before I go. I do not tell this story to make you angry at the Amish community. The community gave me things I still carry. A work ethic that has held me through every hard year since I left, a sense of togetherness so deep it had a texture, a faith that is complicated and wounded and rebuilt but still real. I do not want to pretend those things away. But I tell this story because I know that what happened to me and Rebecca and every girl I grew up with did not only happen in Lancaster County. There are girls in other communities, other religions, other cultures, other families, who are being handed silence right now and being told that silence is virtue, who are being given one conversation at a kitchen table or no conversation at all, and being sent forward into marriages and beds and lives they have no real language for. Who will lie awake in unfamiliar rooms asking questions they were never given permission to ask? And I want those women to know what no one told me on that October morning. Your body is not a mystery to be feared. It is yours. You are allowed to know it. You are allowed to have questions. You are allowed to say this doesn't feel right, and I need more time, and wait, and not yet. Those words are not sin. They are not immodesty. They are not a failure of faith or submission or love. They are the most basic thing a person is owed. I was 19 years old when I sat across from my husband in a lamplight room and had no words for what I needed. I am not 19 anymore, and I will spend as much time as I need to making sure that the words exist. Here, out loud, in a place where anyone who needs them can find them. Because the silence was never holy. It was just silence. If this story touched something in you, tell me in the comments. Tell me what part stayed with you. Tell me your story if you're ready. I read every single one, and you are never as alone as the silence made you feel. Subscribe to Hannah the Amish Girl. There is still so much I haven't said. Until next time, your voice belongs to you. It always did, even when they taught you to swallow it. Choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.